Thomas lived on the edge of the prairie, where the roads no longer promised to take you anywhere. His house stood alone, as if it too had suffered a loss and did not seek anyone's attention. An old barn, a crooked fence, a few trees bent by the wind. Everything here was as taciturn as the owner himself. After his wife's death, Thomas stopped talking more than necessary. He didn't invite guests. He didn't buy anything extra. He didn't even keep a dog. Silence, as it turned out, was the most loyal companion. The day she appeared was dusty, like all the others. The wind blew along the ground, raising dust, as if it wanted to erase someone's footprints. And yet she walked. Quietly. Without a sound. In a thin dress that might once have been blue. Barefoot. Dirty. Her face asked for neither mercy nor bread. Only her eyes, gray, like the sky before a storm, looked straight at him. And remained silent. He stepped out onto the porch, holding a mug of coffee in his hand, and froze. She stopped a few steps away. She didn't come closer. She didn't say a word. She didn't ask for anything. He saw that her feet were wounded, that one palm was scraped and bleeding, that her shoulders were shaking, even though it was warm outside. "Are you alone?" he asked. She didn't answer. She just stared, like an animal accustomed to pain, but still alive. "Did someone chase you?" Silence. He looked into her eyes. For a long time. As if there, inside, he could find something worth saving. "I have a bed. And water. You can stay." He said it calmly, as if talking about the weather. "Until you decide to leave." She nodded slowly. Only then did he realize how much she was shaking. He stepped aside and opened the door. She walked past him without touching him. Not with her eyes. Not with her body. Thus began her first night in a house where no one had expected new voices for a long time. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bed, staring at the darkened ceiling beams and listening to the silence. It used to be comforting to him. Today, it was different. Restless. As if someone had appeared in the house who was louder than the wind in the shutters. He got up before dawn, out of habit. He made coffee. He put water on the stove. By this time, the second room, once a guest room, long forgotten, was still quiet. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. But when he returned from the porch, she was already sitting at the table, on a chair that didn't creak. In the same dress, her eyes slightly downcast, her hair combed with her fingers. Her face showed neither sleep nor fear, only caution. "Were you asleep?" he asked. She nodded, lightly, like the wind. "I'm Thomas." She said nothing. He pushed a mug of water toward her. She took it with both hands, as if afraid to spill it. She drank slowly. She was silent. He noticed how her gaze lingered on the broom in the corner, then on the dusty shelves, on the crumbs near the stove. He froze. Then she got up, walked over and picked up the broom. He didn't say anything. He just watched. She darted around the room like a shadow. She cleaned everything without making a sound, without asking if she could, without trying to please. It was as if it was her way of saying, "I'm here, but not for free." He watched as she carefully gathered the flour spilled from the bag, as she wiped the marks on the window. And at some point, he realized it was easier to breathe in the room, not because it was cleaner, but because someone in the house wanted to stay. On the third day, he gave her a name, not because he wanted to be affectionate. He just needed to call her something. The girl didn't respond. Not with a word. Not with a glance. "Leia," he said at dinner, awkwardly pushing away his plate of stewed beans. "That was my sister's name. She didn't live long. But she was bright." She didn't react. But the next day, when he called out, "Leia, fetch water from the well," she came. without hesitation. His hands hurt. His fingers were rough, clenched, cracked, with salt from the earth stuck in them. He often hid them. Not out of shame, but out of fatigue. They weren't meant for caressing, only for work. That evening, he tried to repair the harness. The flax burned his palms. The strap did not bend as it should. He cursed quietly so as not to scare her. And suddenly, a shadow nearby. Leah approached. She didn't ask. She didn't take it. She just sat down opposite him, and her fingers, thin, careful, clean, touched his hand. He flinched. He wanted to pull away, but he couldn't. She didn't look him in the eyes. She just touched him, rubbed the cracks, applied a warm cloth, quietly, as if with a horse that is afraid of pain. And he suddenly realized, for the first time in many years, that his hands were shaking, not from fatigue, but from a living touch. That night, he sat by the fireplace. He couldn't sleep. The thought echoed in his head. She doesn't speak, but she hears. Not with her ears, with her wounds. And when he heard the floor in Leah's room creak softly through the crack in the door, from footsteps walking without sleep, he realized, there are now two such people in this house. One had lost love. The other had never known it. But maybe both would still have time to understand that it can be quieter than pain. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the darkened beams of the ceiling, listening to the silence. Before, it had seemed comforting to him. Today, it was different. Restless. As if someone had appeared in the house who was silent louder than the wind in the shutters. He got up before dawn. Out of habit. He made coffee. He put water on the stove. By this time, the second room, once a guest room, long forgotten, was still quiet. He didn't knock. He didn't call. But when he returned from the porch, she was already sitting at the table, on a chair that didn't creak. In the same dress, her eyes slightly downcast. Her hair combed with her fingers. Her face showed neither sleep nor fear. Only caution. "Were you asleep?" he asked. She nodded. Lightly, like the wind. "I'm Thomas." She said nothing. He pushed a mug of water toward her. She took it with both hands, as if afraid to spill it. She drank slowly. She was silent. He noticed how her gaze lingered on the broom in the corner, then on the dusty shelves, on the crumbs near the stove. He froze. Then she got up, walked over, and picked up the broom. He didn't say anything. He just watched. She darted around the room like a shadow. She cleaned everything without making a sound, without asking if she could, without trying to please. It was as if it was her way of saying, "I'm here, but not for free." He watched as she carefully gathered the flour spilled from the bag, as she wiped the marks on the window. And at some point, he realized, it was easier to breathe in the room. Not because it was cleaner, but because someone in the house wanted to stay. Morning came slowly. That only happens in a house where no one expects shouting. He went out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, not spilling it on the way, as he always did. But now his steps were quieter, more careful, as if it wasn't just a guest sleeping in the house, but a fragile peace. Leah was already in the yard. She was sweeping the backyard with a broom, slowly and intently. Dust swirled in the sunlight, and for a moment he thought her movements were almost musical, although there were still no sounds. He didn't speak. He just sat down on the steps. He watched. He drank. He listened to the broom creaking. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. In the barn, he was sorting through old saddles. She came in, holding a canvas bag of ashes for the chickens. She didn't interfere. She was just there. And then, to his surprise, she approached an old shelf where forgotten pieces of leather, straps, and scraps of rope lay. She touched them. She picked up one, long and torn, and looked at it, then at him. There was no question in her eyes, but he understood. "It was my wife's old saddle," he said hoarsely. "I haven't been able to bring myself to throw it away. I didn't know why I was keeping it." She lowered her gaze. Then, suddenly, very carefully, she ran her hand over the leather, as if to say, "It can be repaired." He nodded. Not because he wanted to, because he couldn't do otherwise. Later, at dusk, he found her at the kitchen table. In front of her lay scraps of leather, a needle, and thread. She wasn't sewing, just measuring, applying, comparing. Her fingers were dexterous. Too dexterous for a simple girl. He thought, "Where did you learn this?" But he didn't ask. Because he himself was afraid of the question. Where did you learn to be so frighteningly silent? The house became a little quieter, but the silence was no longer piercing. It became like a warm blanket, smelling of bread, hay, and something almost forgotten. Hope. The light in the kitchen was dim, golden, soft. The kind that made the wood look warmer than it really was. She sat by the table, the old saddle leather spread out before her like a puzzle. His wife's name, once etched into the underside, peeked through the cracked edge. She traced a finger over it. He watched from the doorway, unseen. She hadn't said a word, not once. And yet she was stitching pieces of his past back together like it mattered to her. Like he mattered. He stepped into the room, slow enough not to break the silence. "You ever ride?" he asked softly. She didn't look up, but after a second, her fingers paused. Then a nod. Barely there, but certain. "Guess it makes sense," he muttered, mostly to himself. "You don't look like someone who belonged behind four walls." Her hands moved again, steady. She worked like someone who needed the rhythm, who needed something to hold, because letting go was worse. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She didn't flinch. That, somehow, meant more than if she'd smiled. "I can take you out," he offered after a while. "Horseback. Just around the fence line, if you want." She looked up then, first time in hours, and met his eyes. Not wide or scared. Just searching. A long beat passed. Then she nodded again. He breathed out. Slow. Like maybe this was the beginning of something neither of them knew how to name yet. By late morning the next day, the sky had cleared. He saddled up his gentlest mare, Ella, the one his wife used to ride. The saddle still bore faint floral tooling. The stitching on the stirrup had been patched. Her work. Carefully. Precisely. He held the reins as the girl came out, hesitant, watching the horse. She didn't reach for the reins. Instead, she lifted her hand. Palm flat. Offered it to Ella's nose. The mare huffed softly, took a step forward. He said nothing. But in that moment, something passed between the two. Girl and horse. Something that didn't need language, didn't need sound. Just breathe. Stillness. Recognition. He boosted her into the saddle. She didn't wobble. She didn't panic. Like her body remembered even if everything else had been taken. He climbed up behind her on his own horse, and they rode side by side into the morning. The silence between them was not empty. It was full. Days slipped by with the slow rhythm of the prairie wind. She stayed mostly quiet, but the walls of her silence began to shift. Just imperceptibly, like the first thaw after a long winter. He noticed the little things. How she'd pause, listening, really listening. When the wind rustled through the tall grass. How her fingers would twitch, almost catching the faintest sounds he barely registered himself. One afternoon, while he fixed a broken fence post, she brought out a small, worn notebook from her satchel. She didn't say why, but placed it on the rough-hewn table before him. He flipped it open. Inside, careful looping letters filled the pages. Words he recognized. Phrases he didn't expect. She pointed to a sentence. "I hear the wind, but not the words." His throat tightened. That simple line carried so much pain, so much truth. He wanted to speak, to say something that might break through years of solitude. But all he managed was a soft nod. Instead, he picked up a charred stick and on the dusty floor drew a circle. Then a horse. Then her. She watched, eyes wide. Then traced over his drawing with a finger. No words. No pressure. Just understanding. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope stir quietly in his chest. That evening, the sky bruised purple and gold as the sun sank behind the endless plains. The fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows against the cabin walls. She sat by the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the flames. He sat opposite, nursing a cup of black coffee, watching her carefully. A sudden crack from the fire made her flinch, a small tremble shaking her frame. He noticed, heart tightening. Slowly, he reached over and placed his hand near hers on the wooden floor, careful not to startle her. She didn't pull away. Instead, she glanced up, eyes meeting his. Searching. Fragile. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. He cleared his throat and softly began to speak. Not words meant to fill the silence, but ones meant to hold it gently. "My wife. She loved this fire," he said, voice rough but calm. "Every night we'd sit here just like this." She nodded, absorbing each word. He told her stories, not many, just fragments. Of laughter once shared, of the woman he lost. The pain was there, but softened, like old scars touched by sun. She listened. The silence between them no longer heavy, but alive. As the stars blinked awake overhead, he realized this quiet girl was no longer just a stranger. She was becoming a part of the story he'd stopped believing in. The next morning dawned soft and cool, dew clinging to the blades of grass like tiny jewels. The ranch was waking slowly. The low murmur of cattle, the distant crow of a rooster, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. She stood by the porch, watching as he prepared the horses for the day's work. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of a leather glove he'd left behind. He caught her looking and offered a small, almost shy smile. Without a word, she stepped forward, reaching out to touch the reins of one of the saddles. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. He nodded, silently inviting her to come closer. Together, they worked side by side, mending fences, feeding the horses, hauling water. His world, once rigid and closed, began to open in her presence. He noticed how her eyes softened as she observed the ranch, how she moved with a careful grace, as if afraid to disturb the peace. At noon, they sat under the wide shade of an old oak. He pulled out the notebook she'd given him and wrote a single word. Trust. He slid it across the wooden bench to her. She looked up, then down at the word, and for the first time, she smiled. Small, but genuine. In that moment, amidst the golden prairie light, something fragile and new took root between them. Chapter 9. Shadows stir. Days grew warmer, and the endless prairie stretched beneath a sky of pale blue. Yet beneath the calm, shadows from the past stirred quietly, waiting. One evening, as dusk deepened, a sudden noise startled them. The sharp slam of a door in the nearby town, distant but unmistakable. She froze, eyes wide, fingers tightening around the armrest. He noticed immediately. Without a word, he stood, moving closer. His presence was calm, steady, a silent anchor. She bit her lip, fighting the tremor that ran through her. That night, sleep eluded her. Memories flickered. A drunken voice, angry shouts, the weight of betrayal. He sat beside her in the dim light, offering no questions, only a blanket draped over her shoulders. His quiet understanding spoke louder than any words. For the first time, she let the walls of silence crack, letting a flicker of trust shine through. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. She sat by the window, tracing patterns in the dust on the sill. Outside, the ranch buzzed with quiet life. The low hum of insects, the distant calls of birds, the soft clatter of hooves on the dirt. He entered the room, his heavy boots thudding against the floorboards. She looked up, startled for a moment, then relaxed as his familiar presence filled the space. He spoke softly, his voice low and steady, careful not to startle her. "I don't expect you to speak. Not yet." She met his eyes, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. He pulled out a small wooden box from his coat pocket, a keepsake from his late wife. Opening it, he revealed a delicate silver pendant, shaped like a feather. "This was hers," he said quietly. It helped her find peace when words failed. She reached out hesitantly, fingertips brushing the cool metal. Slowly, she whispered a single word, barely audible. "Thank you." Her voice cracked the silence like a fragile dawn breaking through night. He smiled softly, a warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time, words joined their quiet bond. Days passed like the gentle sway of the prairie grass in the wind, each one a step closer to a fragile understanding between them. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery hues, she sat at the edge of the porch, fingers nervously tracing the grain of the wood. He joined her silently, settling beside her without a word. The wind carried the faint sound of a distant creek, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, she reached out, hesitating, and placed her hand atop his. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. A silent promise, an unspoken truce. He looked down, meeting her gaze with gentle eyes. "Your silence. It's not a wall," he whispered. "It's a door." She squeezed his hand, a soft smile breaking through. The night wrapped around them, full of possibility and quiet hope. The dawn crept softly over the ranch, golden light spilling across the worn wooden beams and dust-speckled air. The world was waking, but inside the small cabin, time seemed still. He sat at the workbench, calloused hands carefully mending a broken saddle strap. She watched him, curiosity mingling with cautious trust in her eyes. Suddenly, he paused, looking down at his roughened hands, scarred from years of labor. She reached out gently, her fingers brushing the worn skin as if afraid to disturb the stories they told. Without a word, he extended his hand towards her. She took it, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Her touch was soft, almost healing, and for the first time in years, his hands felt less alone. He met her eyes, gratitude, and something deeper shining there. In the quiet of that morning, their worlds began to weave together, a silent dance of mending and belonging. Chapter 13. The Quiet Confession. Days slipped by with the rhythm of the ranch, steady, unhurried, filled with small moments that spoke louder than words. One late afternoon, as the sun hung low and the sky blushed with amber, they found themselves seated beside the fire pit. The flames flickered gently, casting warm shadows on their faces. She traced circles in the dirt with a stick, hesitating before finally breaking the silence. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I was sold. By my father." The weight of the confession hung heavy in the air. He reached out, placing a rough but tender hand over hers. "You're safe now." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, she met his gaze fully. No walls, no shields. A soft smile tugged at her lips. In that moment, beneath the vast prairie sky, two broken souls found the courage to face their pasts and the hope to build a future. The morning was crisp, the air filled with the scent of pine and fresh earth. Light filtered softly through the cabin window, illuminating the dust particles dancing like tiny stars. She sat at the worn wooden table, a small slate resting in front of her. Fingers trembling, she picked up a piece of chalk and carefully wrote a single word. He leaned in, his eyes fixed on the delicate letters. Home. Her breath caught, eyes searching his for a sign. A reaction. Any sign. A slow smile spread across his face, softening his weathered features. That's where you belong, he said gently. For the first time, she spoke aloud what her heart felt. A quiet word, but heavy with meaning. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with hope. The prairie morning stretched wide and golden, the horizon glowing with promise. The ranch was alive with gentle sounds, the soft neigh of horses, the rustling of grass, and the distant call of a hawk. She stepped outside the cabin, sunlight warming her face. For the first time, she didn't flinch at the noises around her. Instead, she breathed deeply, embracing the world. He watched her from the porch, a quiet smile touching his lips. His hands, once rough and scarred, now seemed steady and sure, like the life they were building together. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange was everything. Pain and healing, fear and courage, loss and love. No words were needed. Together, they faced the new day. Two souls mended, ready to write the next chapter.